my son and I did it when my husband was not at home. Hello everyone, my name is Lily. I am 30 years old. I used to have a good husband, a rich family, and a comfortable house. But behind that flashy appearance, my heart is empty. My husband, Banhu, is a good man, responsible, but he is too busy. His work is like a chain, pulling him away from the warmth of his family. In the morning, I wake up in silence. The big house echoes with familiar sounds, the sound of the coffee maker, the sound of the TV broadcasting the morning news. Banhu hurriedly eats breakfast, always looking at the clock as if time is something he has to fight for. He kisses me lightly on the face before leaving the house, leaving me with an unfinished breakfast. I often sit there, watching the sunlight through the curtains, feeling like a shadow in my own life. My son, Luki, 19 years old, is another story. He used to be a smart, promising boy, but somehow Luki decided to drop out of college to work at a local grocery store. His reason was to be free. Luki often came home at noon on hot summer days. He opened the door with a forced smile and sweaty shoulders. I often prepared cold water and snacks, knowing that Luki would only eat a quick meal before going back to work. Between us, there were not always deep conversations. Luki was often silent, sharing little, as if there was an invisible wall between me and my mother. Days like that kept repeating. I felt like I was drifting in an endless wave of uncertain time. A husband away from home, a distant child in a cold house. I began to wonder, is this life really what I want? That afternoon, the sun was blazing hot. The air was stuffy all over the house. I felt tired and decided to take a bath to cool down. When I got close to the bathroom, I suddenly heard the sound of running water and realized that Luki was inside. The bathroom door was slightly open, leaving a small gap. I didn't intend to look, but the light from inside made me glance. Seeing Luki's sweet potato in a private state made me want it. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, and didn't know what to do. I had a strange feeling, as if someone was hitting that part of me, mixed with shame and inconvenience. I tried to turn away quickly to avoid being discovered by Luki. But fate seemed to be teasing me. When I stepped out, I accidentally bumped into the mop in the corner of the wall. A loud noise echoed in the silence of the afternoon. My heart almost stopped beating. I was so embarrassed that I could only run to the living room, sit down on the sofa, and try to calm down. I felt ashamed and had a very bad thought, as if I had just violated an invisible boundary between mother and son. Even though I knew it was just a one-time misunderstanding, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. These questions kept repeating in my head, making it impossible for me to focus on anything else. A moment later, Luki entered the living room. He had changed his clothes, but there was still a confused look on his face. He glanced at me for a moment, as if waiting for an explanation, but I just smiled, trying to act normal. I asked, "Is the store crowded today?" Luki answered briefly, "It's normal, Mom." After the incident that afternoon, the image of Luki in the bathroom kept lingering in my mind. I knew I shouldn't think too much about it, but the feeling of shame and guilt was like the wave, overpowering me again and again. As Luki's mother, I know that this is wrong, but I can't control the mixed emotions in my heart. I tried to act normal when Luki walked out of the bathroom. My son was wearing a simple t-shirt and shorts, holding a bottle of water, walking into the living room. His face was still calm. There was no sign of anything unusual. I felt a little relieved, but my heart was still restless. What did Mom do that made the mop fall so loudly? I thought something happened, Luki said with a slight smile. I was startled and quickly replied, I didn't notice. It's so hot today, I was going to clean up a bit. Luki didn't ask anymore, just sat down on the chair, turned on the TV and started watching an adultery movie. I didn't understand what Lukey meant. I looked at my son, I was worried. I'm just a mother, but why did that incident make me feel wrong? I stood up and walked into the kitchen as if to find some peace in cooking. But even as I was holding a knife to cut vegetables, my mind was still lost in that afternoon. I told myself that it was all just a misunderstanding, nothing more, nothing less. But the strange feeling still haunted me, like a hot wind blowing through me, making it hard to breathe. I began to wonder, is this a tragedy? A cold married life, a son who seemed to have grown beyond my concern. I never thought I would feel so lonely that I would care about things like this. But that feeling was not just shame, but something deeper, the emptiness and deadlock in my soul. That night, when Lukey had returned to his room, I sat alone in the living room. The dim light covered the whole room. I picked up my glass of wine, took a small sip, telling myself that I had to overcome this feeling. But I could, when every time I saw Lukey, the memory of that afternoon made me feel uncomfortable. One evening, after dinner, my husband Banho sat at the desk with his laptop as usual. When I finished cleaning the kitchen, he turned to look at me, seemingly hesitant. Lily, I have to go on a business trip for a week next week. The company has a new project and I can't refuse. I paused for a moment, even though I knew this wasn't the first time. His absence was no longer a surprise. I nodded, trying to smile. Okay, don't worry. Lukey and I will be fine at home. Banho just smiled, then went back to work. The familiar feeling of emptiness came back. I sighed, walked into the living room, where Lukey was watching a movie about adultery. Hearing me talk about Dad's business trip, Lukey seemed surprised. Going away again? Why are you always so busy? I just kept silent. A moment later, Lukey turned to look at me, his eyes expecting something. Why don't you and I go somewhere to play, change the atmosphere a bit? I heard there's a very beautiful lake in the suburbs, we can go on a picnic. I suddenly felt a little guilty. How long has it been since we went on a family trip? But thinking about my responsibility to my husband made me hesitate. Okay, your dad is on a business trip. I think it's better to stay home. We'll have more fun going out together another time. Lukey didn't say anything more, just nodded, but I clearly saw the disappointment flash across Lukey's face. Lukey stood up, turned off the TV and quietly walked back to his room. I sat there, full of worry. It seemed like I had let time widen the gap between me and my son. From a child who always needed his mother's arms, Lukey has now grown up, and I no longer understand his thoughts. I remember the old days, when Lukey was little, always clinging to me. But now, it seems like there's an invisible wall between me and my son. The next morning, when Lukey was getting ready for work, I deliberately started a conversation. Yesterday, Mom was a bit stressed. Maybe Mom will think more about what you said about going out. Actually, I also feel like it's been a long time since we did anything together. Lukey was surprised, but her eyes seemed to light up. Really, Mom? If you want, we can go this weekend. I'll make time. I nodded, feeling relieved. Even though I knew it was just a small step, I could feel the bond between mother and daughter gradually returning. Lukey smiled brightly before walking out the door, and I realized that with just a little more effort, I could make up for what I had unintentionally lost. That afternoon, when Lukey came home for dinner, we talked more than usual. She told me about her job at the grocery store, about the interesting customers she met. I listened, no longer just like a worried mother, but like a real friend. Those little moments made me realize, the distance between me and Lukey is not insurmountable. No matter how busy or responsible life is, family relationships always need to be nurtured. That evening, after dinner, Lukey and I sat in the living room. The atmosphere was light but a bit quiet, as if both of us were trying to find a way to fill the gap between mother and child. I asked about Lukey's work, hoping to ease the tension of the past few days. "Is the store busy today?" "It's okay, Mom, but I'm a bit tired because it's hot," Lukey replied, her eyes still glued to the phone screen. The two of us were silent for a while. I was about to stand up to clear the tea table when Lukey suddenly spoke, her voice a bit hesitant but containing something indescribable. "Mom, the other day, in the bathroom, did you see anything?" My heart stopped beating. I was surprised. I didn't expect Lukey to directly mention that. I was confused, not knowing how to respond. "Lukey, I didn't mean to. I just passed by and… My words were interrupted, unable to explain clearly. Lukey turned to look at me, his eyes both serious and a little confused. "I know. I saw Mom's shadow through the crack of the door, but I thought she wouldn't say anything. I pretended not to notice that day." Lukey's words made me even more confused. I felt an unconcealable shame and guilt. Every word he said seemed to strip away my emotions, revealing the embarrassment I tried to hide. I tried to stay calm, but didn't know how to face this situation. "Mom really didn't mean to, Lukey." "Mom, sorry if that made Lukey feel uncomfortable. I tried to tell Com that I didn't mean to see Com's pet, honestly, even though I was very confused inside." Lukey nodded slightly, seemingly not wanting to make things more tense. The boy smiled shyly, saying, "It's okay, Mom. I just want to remind you to knock on the door next time before approaching the toilet." Lukey's joke lightened the mood, but I still had an indescribable feeling in my heart. This seemingly simple incident had complicated the relationship between me and my son. I couldn't help but wonder, did I accidentally hurt Lukey? Or was this just her way of dealing with her own embarrassment? That night, when Lukey returned to her room, I sat alone on the sofa. A vague feeling rose in my heart, both relieved that the story had been mentioned, and worried that the distance between us might grow larger. I decided that, although it was difficult, I had to try to talk to Lukey more, find a way to prevent this relationship from falling into a state of awkwardness or distance. One evening, after dinner, Lukey and I sat in the living room. The atmosphere in the house was strangely quiet, except for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. I realized that Lukey had something to say. His eyes looked away, his hands clenched as if he was trying to muster up all his courage. "Mom." Lukey spoke, his voice trembling slightly, completely different from his usual relaxed tone. "What's the matter, son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Lukey looked at me. His eyes seemed to be searching for something deep. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Mom, I want to tell you something. I've had feelings for you for a long time." Lukey's words surprised me. I thought I had misheard, but his serious eyes made me realize that this is not a joke. I was confused, feeling the atmosphere in the room become suffocating. "What do you mean, Lukey? You're talking about a son's feelings for his mother, right?" I tried to ask, hoping the answer would clear things up. But Lukey shook his head, his voice more firm. "That's not it, Mom. This is not how a son feels for his mother. I love you like a man loves a woman." My heart sank. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. Lukey's words echoed in my head, like something impossible but clearly present. "Lukey, I can't say that. We are mother and son. That feeling isn't right," I said, my voice choked, trying to stay calm despite my confusion. Lukey lowered his head, as if struggling with himself. I know this is wrong. But I can't stop feeling this way, Mom. I always think of you, not the way I think of others. I felt a mixture of emotions welling up inside me: surprise, worry, and something hard to name. I couldn't deny that the loneliness of my marriage had made me seek intimacy in a relationship with Lukey. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Lukey, you are a young man with a whole future ahead of you. These feelings may be temporary, since we live close to each other, and you have no one else to share them with. You need time to think more clearly. Lukey raised his head, his eyes filled with pain. Do you think this is just temporary? I've felt like this for a long time. I was speechless, not knowing what else to say. I stood up and walked out to the yard to breathe the air. The faint moonlight illuminated the quiet yard, but inside me, a storm was raging. I knew I had to find a way to solve this. But how? How to get things back on track when the boundary had been broken? The day I kissed him on the sofa, I was thinking about how to handle it so that Lukey would understand. I was confused when Lukey appeared, his eyes full of worry. I hadn't finished my sentence. Lukey had already answered me, Mom. I love you like a daughter, don't worry, okay? I was wondering. Lukey held my hand and hugged me. Lukey put a hand on that place of mine. My body trembled. Both of us gradually crossed the line. I couldn't resist my feelings for Lukey. We entered each relationship that was broken, the feeling of guilt, but also the past that was infatuated in my mind. From that day, Lukey's face was bright. My child seemed to be creating a dusty history with the time my husband was away from home. Lukey and I created a secret relationship in the house. We both hid it. The feeling of anxiety, shame, and conflict still haunts me. Congratulations on listening to the story. Please don't miss listening to the next true stories.